Welcome back to our Caleb Company Facebook Live. We wanted to bring you good reports, and I'm really wanting to bring you a good report. You know that I've been hawking this message from this book. It's really not the book as much as it is the message from the book. I really believe it needs to get there, and please pray with me that this message gets out. The subtitle for the book is Hope, Help, and Encouragement for Living in the Last Days. And I really believe what I was seeing when this was published in 2018, what I was seeing was what's happening there. I wasn't seeing the coronavirus, but I was seeing bad things beginning to happen, and yet good things are going to be in the middle of it. As you know, it's wickedness and righteousness ripening side by side. So today I'm going to concentrate on chapter 2 out of that book that says, listen to the right report. And the point is, if you are listening to the bad reports, all the horror that's going on, and you're not putting the but God factor in there, then you're going to be filled with dismay, with fear, with horror. But when you put the but God in there, then bad things, we can see God doing it. One of the things that I've done in life is that when something is happening, bad is happening, I go to the worst place that I could possibly imagine, and I walk with the Lord there, and then the enemy can't tempt me that, because if that's what happens, hey, God will use it. I mean, for example, in this present thing, in some people's eyes, probably not in mine, but the worst thing that could happen to me is that I would die. No, that's not the worst. But you see my point. If that's the worst thing that could happen. I could get coronavirus. Some of my close friends could. If they're believers, you see what I'm saying? Let's go to the worst place and then just imagine the Lord there. Now, this whole thing began to really make sense to me some years back when I was invited to see 2 films that were being shown at one of the theaters here, been rented out for the night. Place was packed with believers because these were films that were supposed to talk about what's going on in the world and what we need to be praying about. And so I went to the movie and walked in, knew a lot of the people. First film was shown, talking about all the horrors of radical Islam, and particularly noted a particular nation. And I'd been reading about the revival in that nation just a few days before that, but there was nothing said about the revival. It was only about the evils of radical Islam. And the announcer got up after the first film to introduce the second one, and I don't know what he said, but what I heard was Nazism was threatening the world, but thank God we defeated it. And communism was threatening the world, but that's at least weakened. But if we don't get rid of radical Islam, we're all going to be toast. And I got up and left before the second film because there was no but God in it all. And in retrospect, I think I should have gotten up with that brother at the intermission and put my arm around him saying, brother, here's one of the things we need to be thinking through all of this. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And I want to point you biblically to 2 heroes of the good report. And it's very Caleb-ish because these are, one of us named is Caleb and the other is Joshua. And you know the story, but God told Moses to send these spies out, and they were to report back to him. And he said, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, whether they're few or many, and what kind of land do they have, and what kind of towns do they live in, and are they walled or fortified? And these 12 men went out to spy out the land. God has promised this land. He gave the promise to Abraham years ago that they would have this land in 400 years, and they're in that 400-year period now. And actually, it's only an 11-day trip from where they were to Israel, but it took them 40 years to get there because they didn't listen to the right report. So the 10 came back, and they said, the people who live there are powerful. That's true. And the cities are fortified and very large. I suppose that's true. We even saw descendants of Anak there. People we saw there were of great size. We saw the Nephilim. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe it is. And then he says, they are stronger than we are. The land we explored devours those living in it. We seemed like grasshoppers in their eyes, and we looked the same to them. Really? I think they begin to stretch the truth now, to exaggerate, to try to sway the crowd. This is like listening to the evening news. And then they said, the cities are large with walls up to the sky. Come on now, that one's over the top. But you see what I'm saying? If that's all Israel listened to, they listened to that, but they observed only by what their eyes saw. If you're only living by what your eyes see and what you are experiencing, you're not putting the God factor into your own life. Believers today are racked with fear. We're supposed to be the most optimistic people in the entire world. I tell people that I'm eternally optimistic, and I intend to stay that way because I've read the Word. I know the end of the book. We win. So Caleb and Joshua walk up then, and they start saying, okay, this is all true what you said. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good, and yes, there are people there, and they're rebelling against the Lord. But he says to them, but don't rebel against the Lord. Remember the God's promises. That's what he's really saying. Don't be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord's with us. Hello, this is the way we're to walk in today's world. We are walking in the Lord. And ultimately, whether it's through death or sickness or persecution or whatever comes, ultimately God will work it all for good. So today we have two voices in what's happening in our world. The voice of fear and despair and hopelessness, and the voice of believers, which is sometimes not real vocal, which is a voice of hope and joy and love and faith and confidence. Now, you will never walk in this kind of confidence by simply listening to the evening news or the commentaries of our day, and sometimes not even by what is being spoken among believers. We will walk in this kind of fear when we abide by the book. When we walk in, remember Psalm 91, no harm will befall us. Well, yeah, but what if we died? That's still no harm eternally. And so let's read the Word and believe it. Now, through the years, I've walked with people that knew how to do this. I never will forget being in the apartment of Sister Mabel in Beijing, China. We had taken Bibles over, smuggled them in, and we were in her apartment, and a whole wall in her apartment was filled with Bibles. And we said, well, Sister Mabel, aren't you afraid to have these Bibles just so openly here? And she said, what can they do to me? I've been in prison. They can kill me. I'll be with Jesus. That's the kind of heart that I want. That's the kind of heart Caleb and Joshua had. Even if they died in the battle, they knew they were going to win the battle. Todd and I spent time in Mozambique with Heidi and Roland Baker. They knew they were going to one of the poorest nations of the world. They knew that disease and all kinds of things were rampant. They knew that they could give their lives there, as missionaries have done through the centuries. But they knew this was the will of God, and God so strengthened them that, yes, we've been there and seen some of the miraculous ways in which God has blessed them. My friends David and Laurie Vanderpool, a doctor who had a very prestigious practice here in Nashville, sold his practice, their home, their cars, and moved to Haiti, among some of the poorest people in the world. And again, they knew they could lose their lives there. They may die there. They may get some kind of disease. They're exposed to all kinds of things. But we have something that's stronger than simply this physical life. And so we're to walk in what God desires for us to do, regardless of whether it's going to be good or bad for this temporary time. They love their lives so as not to shrink from death, John says in writing from the Revelation. Several years ago, during when the rockets were being fired from Gaza, I happened to be with some brothers in Ashdod, and the rockets were firing there. And people were, when the sirens sounded, then people had to run for shelter. But you know what our brothers and sisters there were doing? Some of them were going in the midst of the rockets being launched, taking food to the shut-ins, to the elderly, to the Holocaust survivors, to people like that. They were rising above what was happening. May God help us so that we rise above what is happening in our day. There's a few years ago, I read the account of 13 people that were baptized in Baghdad at one of the churches there, and within 2 weeks, 11 of them were dead. Okay, does that frighten you? We should have no fear of death. My dear brothers and sisters, read the book. Believe the book. Pray the book. I'm with Lou Engle, who in this book, on page 15 of this book, he says this in the closing words of his foreword. He says that he too will not live. He says, Don lifts up the biblical hero Caleb, and he says, like Don, I've seen by dreams the prophetic promised land, and I will not live under the shadow of statistics, failure, and doom and gloom prognosticators. I'm living under the shadow of the dominating prophecy that this book heralds. And then in my own time, I wrote in the back of this particular chapter, let me just read you the closing words of this particular chapter. A few mornings ago, I woke up with a message emblazoned on my heart, a message I sent to some of those with whom I walk most closely. And here's what I said: we do not simply want to make it to make it home ourselves. We want to take millions with us. And so I saw a picture of a gigantic storm, but we were walking into the storm, not away from it. We were walking forward to rescue those who were perishing. And so another message flashed across my screen. When the storms come, don't head for the bunker with your food and guns to hide from the approaching disasters. Move into the storms, assured of his divine protection as long as you're in his will. Remember, that was published a few years ago. It's talking about our day. My dear brothers and sisters, let us live in the confidence of the Lord. Let us walk under his protection. Let us serve. Let us ask God what we can do for others, not always what they can do for us, and how we can be spared evil. Let's walk into the storm to help people. In Jesus' name, blessings to you.